One of the biggest ways that you can elevate your screen graphics is by using animated lower thirds. Now these can be for countless different things, but one of the most common ones that I see is name banners for pastors or speakers on stage. Today, I'm going to show you how I take Photoshop files of lower thirds and animate them in After Effects. Now the biggest mistake I see people make when they animate lower thirds or pretty much anything coming from Photoshop into After Effects is they jump right into After Effects and start animating. Now sometimes that can work, especially with simpler files, but what most people don't realize is that most of your work for animating things from Photoshop to After Effects actually takes place in Photoshop itself. So here I have a bunch of name banners to animate made by our incredible graphic designer on staff at our church, and I want to animate all of these, so there are a few things we need to do in Photoshop before we open up After Effects. The first thing we need to do is ungroup the artboard so we have one document size. And then we want to flatten and merge as many layers as possible that we don't want to animate. And the last thing we want to do is ungroup the Photoshop groups, because those come into After Effects as pre-comps, which can make things a little more confusing than we want today. What I'm going to actually do first is narrow these down and delete most of the ones that are the same. And this is because we're going to actually duplicate these name banners and add in the different names in After Effects later on. So right now in Photoshop, we just want one single file and we're going to replace the text later on. So most of these are the same. The only one that's actually different here is Jay Stewart. He has some social media info on the right. So all the other ones I'm going to delete. Okay, and then we're left with just these two. Now, just for today, I'm not going to worry about animating Pastor Jay's. I'm just going to worry about animating the generic one that'll be applied to a bunch of different name banners, all the other ones. So I'm going to remove his for right now. All right, and now all we're left with is one single name banner, and there's a little trick. So you can right click on here and just go ahead and hit ungroup artboards, but the problem is you can see it actually made our document size much bigger than we actually need. So cool trick with that we're gonna do is I'm gonna undo that, and then I'm gonna actually grab a rectangle and I'm gonna make a rectangle. Actually, I'll just click here in the middle and make it 1920 by 1080, which is the size that we need. And I can just say from center, and then I'm gonna make that no stroke and then maybe fill it with just black. And then I'm gonna center that in our artboard here. And so this is basically just a placeholder that's going to help us line up our layers once we resize our document. So then once again, I'm going to ungroup the artboards and then go up to image, canvas size, and that's just going to be 1920 by 1080, and hit OK, proceed. Cool, so now we have the right size, but as you can see, our name banners are actually off, and good thing we have the rectangle that we just made. So all I'm going to do is drag all those layers back into place. Cool, so that may not be exact, but that's pretty close. So I'll go ahead and delete our rectangle, and now we have our name banner back in place just how we want it. And so if you remember, the second thing that we need to do after ungrouping the artboards and getting it to just one single document size is flatten and merge as many layers as possible for mainly things that we don't want to animate. So I'm just going to open up in our layers panel here, and I'm just going to think through like what are some of the things that I actually want to animate and what are some of the things I'm just going to leave alone. So a lot of this lower third, this is actually the graphic background here. I'm not really going to touch most of that. So for just today, I'm going to merge this whole group. And that way we're just left with a single lower third layer, and that'll make it so much easier in After Effects later on, because some of those layers, if I just undo like some of the clipping masks and smart objects and pattern fills, some of those will come into After Effects, but some won't. So just for today, I'm going to merge that whole group. And then some of these other ones that are linked, either smart objects or linked to the cloud. Again, sometimes those can work, but today I'm just going to go ahead and right click and rasterize those just for simplicity. This text is fine. I'm actually going to open up this smart object and copy this text, and I'm just going to paste it back in this document so we have the original text, because we can actually make the text editable in After Effects later on. And then I'll just drag it back into place. Okay, that's pretty close. So I'll go ahead and delete the smart object, and then we're just left with this other actually editable text in there. And then all we have left here is the two texts, the title and then the name. And so the last thing that we need to do before we go into After Effects is we need to ungroup some of these groups. And luckily in this one, we only have one. So super easy. I'm just going to select the text and then drag it on out. And then I'll delete that. And then the only other thing is this globe. I'm just going to convert it to a smart object and then rasterize it. So completely isolated. That's just our globe right there. Cool. So I think that's pretty much it. So we basically just have some images and some layers, and we have text with a stroke, which will come into After Effects editable. We have our globe, and then we have our text with stroke and outer glow. That's totally fine. That looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do here is go up and save a copy of this. Usually I just put for video on the end of the document and hit save. And then we are ready to go into After Effects. So I've already got After Effects opened up, and we don't even need to make a new composition because After Effects will do that for us when we import our Photoshop file. So I'm just going to open up my Finder, find our file, the for video file, and just drag it in. And then it's going to give us this dialog box, and I like to use composition, retain layer sizes, and then keep editable layer styles. So that stroke and that outer glow layer style that you saw in there, those will continue to be editable, which is exactly what we want. So then I'll just hit OK. And as you can see over on the left, it brought in a main composition. That's our main Photoshop file. And then this folder with all of our layers. Now, if there were groups or artboards, it's going to bring in other compositions as like pre-comps and put it into this folder. But right now, all we have is this main composition, which is super simple, super easy, exactly what we want. So I'll double click on that, and you can see it looks exactly the same as it does in Photoshop. I'll change the resolution to full and give a little more space. And if I toggle my transparency grid, you can see we are looking pretty good so far. So I'm going to rename this composition name banner master, and you'll see why later on when we go into generating all the other name banners from this one. And then the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our two layers that I remember are editable text, this one too actually, and I'm going to right click and go to create, convert to editable text, and now those are actually text layers, so I can go in and edit, add more text, and we'll be able to edit that too later on for the rest of our name banners. Awesome. And so this is really where you just get to have fun with it. Now we have all the basics in and imported in After Effects. And yeah, really, this is just where you get to decide how you want it to look like. I have a couple other videos on animating in After Effects in general, and there's tons of tutorials online as well. I'm going to be making some more down the road. But today I'm going to walk through how I would personally animate something like this. It's completely subjective, and obviously by series or by design style, a lot of that changes. And so a few techniques I'll use in here may not apply to some other ones and vice versa. But today what I'm going to do is start with this box behind, and that should be our last layer. Yep, so I just kind of want to animate this coming in from the bottom. That's pretty simple, and I tend to do that pretty often with lower thirds because it's easy and it usually looks really good. So I'm going to hit P to open up our position, and then I like to right click and enable separate dimensions on here. It just gives us a little more control, especially if I know that I'm only going to be animating like in one direction, and so in this case just the Y direction. So I'm going to scroll back to maybe a couple frames in and click animate on the Y position, so that'll add a keyframe where I know I want it to end up. From there I can go back to the beginning and drag it out of frame. And I know I definitely want to animate all of these with motion blur, so I'm just going to go ahead and enable that. And I have a bunch of other tips, including that one and my other motion graphics tip video. If you want to check that out, I'll leave it linked at the top of this video right here, as well as down in the description. So I'll enable motion blur, and then you can see we have a little bit of motion blur coming through here since it's being animated. But the real thing that we want to do here, if I play this, it comes in, it looks fine, but man, using easy ease again in that other video, but here I'll just go over it real quick. I'll open up the graph editor because it just gives me a little more flexibility. I can go in here and hit function F9 and it'll add some easy ease keyframes, and it's actually pretty good. But Sometimes I like a little more control, so I'll hold Option and Shift and drag out from this keyframe and make it a little more exponential. And then you can see if I play through, it comes in really, really smoothly, and it makes it look so much better than just a regular linear keyframe. So that's pretty good. I'm good with that background. The next thing we can look at is the text. Now, again, I have another video on how to make instant text animations in After Effects, which is a game changer if you're animating these in After Effects. It just makes life so much easier. But today, I'm just going to grab one for my effects and presets. These come in After Effects, so you have them if you have After Effects. But I'm just going to open up our animation presets and go into Text and Animate In. And today, I'm going to grab Random Fade Up, and I'm going to drag that onto our text. And then you can see if I click down here and hit U to view our keyframes, it's already added them a little too late. So I'm going to just move them around, maybe make this one a little longer. Scroll back to the beginning, it animates in each character. I think that looks pretty cool. So I'll give that a little more. I'll just select these and hit F9 to easy ease those. Yeah, that's pretty cool, pretty simple. And I'll go back to the start of this keyframe and do the same for our other text down here. Maybe I'll extend this out just to make it a little more dynamic. Cool, awesome. So we've already got a really good start. That's pretty good. Before I forget, I'm gonna go into my composition settings and set this to 9 seconds. So I know we have enough time, and then I'll just extend these layers all the way to the end. And then the next thing I wanna do is do a cool different effect on this pen stroke down here. That's gonna be called the stroke effect. So I'll just search for it over here and drag it over. And it's going to be under generate, so generate stroke. So I'm going to hide that for right now, and what we want to do with this effect is I'm going to go ahead and grab the pen tool, and I really just want to trace this, so I'm going to animate this signature animating on. So I'm going to go ahead and just trace this with the pen tool as a mask, so make sure you have your layers selected, and then I'm going to draw around this to trace it. All right, cool. And I'm going to give a little extra room on the end. And then really the key with this stroke effect is if I enable it, I want to hit reveal original image. And then I'm going to bring this brush size up and change the path to mask 1. And I can adjust our brush size a little more. I want to get it just barely enough to cover the whole signature. That looks pretty good. And then what we can do is take our start and end. I'm going to go with the end. And if I drag it down, see how that just animates on really, really nicely. So you can play with this a little more. Like these edges kind of get tough. I would probably refine this a little bit, but I won't just for the tutorial's sake. But what I'm going to do is add a keyframe for the end. And I'll drag that out a little bit and then add a keyframe, bring it all the way back down to 0. And then you can see since I did that and motion blur is enabled, it adds just a really slight motion blur onto this motion. That's a little slow, so maybe I'll bring that up. And then I definitely want to easy ease these. So I'll go back to my graph editor, hold down Option and drag out a handle onto the end. So then as it approaches, it'll just ease in really slowly. Awesome. I'll just do the same with the start here. Yeah, that looks really cool. Awesome. We'll go back and zoom out of here. Cool, that looks really good so far. It's honestly a little fast, so you can select all your keyframes and hold Option and drag the last keyframe, and it'll extend all of them about the same length of time, which is super awesome. Cool, that looks good. And then one other thing I'll do with this text, maybe I'll use another effect under our animation presets. Maybe I'll go with fade up lines since there's quite a few lines in there. We'll see how that looks. And I'll just drag those keyframes back to the beginning. Maybe make that one a little longer since it's kind of an accessory to the main name banner. Shorten it up just a little bit, but that looks pretty good. And then the last thing is the globe. I could animate that coming from the bottom, I could do some masking, but maybe just today I'll just keyframe the opacity and just do a little fade up. And maybe I'll start that a little later on too. Awesome, that looks really good. Now, one more thing that I'll add that I don't want to animate a lot during when the name banner is supposed to be up, because I don't want it to be super distracting, but sometimes it's nice to add a little touch that just keeps some motion moving while it's up on the screen. So for that sake today, I actually would love to animate the outer glow on this text and to kind of just make it pop. So I will find our main name text and open up layer styles and go to outer glow. Let's see, I think the size is probably what I want to animate, and animate's a rough word, but what I'm really going to do is add the wiggle expression onto this. So I'll hold Option, click on that, and type in wiggle. And so the first number here is the frequency, which is how many times you want it to wiggle per second. And the second number is going to be how much you want it to wiggle, so how much that property is going to move numerically. So for here, I don't want it to move fast, so maybe I'll start with 4,5 maybe, and sometimes I just have to kind of see how it looks. Awesome, that's pretty good. And then one more thing, maybe I'll animate the stroke too, just a little bit. So it just adds a little extra motion in there too. I'll do another wiggle expression. Maybe 3,1. We'll see how that looks. Yeah, that's pretty good. Maybe this one's a little fast, so I'll put that one at 3,2 and then go back down to 4. Cool. Yeah, I like that, man. That's awesome. I like that it's really subtle, but it's got a little bit of motion in there. And then the last thing that I want to do to animate this one specifically is I'll hit U to collapse all my animations, and then hit U one more time to open up all my keyframes. And what I actually want is I want this to animate back off. So for each one of these, I'm just going to go ahead and Command C to copy, go down towards the end, Command V, and then right click, time reverse keyframes, and that's just going to animate it off the same way it animated on. So this is a really easy part of the process. Just takes a few seconds to animate everything back off the same way it animated on. That looks pretty good. And the last thing is I'll just adjust the position a little bit, because it's kind of hard to judge when it's doing it in the inverse at the end. Cool, that looks really good. I'm really happy with that. And again, we have our transparency, so I'll show you how to export that at the end. But as I said in the beginning, I know we wanted to create all the other name banners off of this one, and this is kind of going to be our master template. So how we're going to do that is by using Essential Graphics. And man, this tip is crucial if you're animating a lot of things that are going to be the same, and if you have to make changes down the line, you don't want to be making changes to every single composition. So this is going to be a game changer. And I'm just going to go up to the window, and I want to show my Essential Graphics panel. And I'm just going to select my composition, call this name banner master. And then what I want to do is just drag in these two source text properties, so that in each other composition I can edit those two properties and change the name and the title. So I'll hit U to collapse, and then I want to go into text, source text, and just drag it up. And this is going to be our name. And then in the mission, I'm going to do the exact same thing, source text, and just leave that at mission. I'll just go to the middle and hit set poster time so we get a better view of what we're working with in there. And now that we have that completely animated, we can go back to our project panel, and then I want to drag this onto the new composition button. So that's going to basically pre-compose that into an additional composition. And then maybe I'll rename this to someone else that I know we have to make a name banner for, like Pastor Nathan Smith. Then if I double click onto his, it may not look like anything different and it still says Melanie Stewart. But if we open up this layer and go into essential properties, we now have this name and mission. So I can right click on that and hit edit value. And I'm gonna just type in Nathan Smith and hit OK. And you can see now this changed to be our name and change the mission. He's an executive pastor. So I'm just gonna type that in and hit OK. Awesome. And then I can see right away I have an issue. I think this text is left aligned. So I'm going to go back into our master composition, change the mission to be centered, and then just drag it over and center it under our name. Pretty close. And then if I go back over, you can see it centers up. So this has completely changed the game for animating a lot of things for me really quickly, and a lot of things that can be changed, because then if I need to make any change, if I want to like even just hide a layer, like hide the background and go back, it automatically hit it in all of our other compositions. So I would just continue to duplicate this one layer. You can go in, add your other pastors' names, any other speakers. It makes it super easy to create a new name banner for a guest speaker that comes. Super quick. A great feature of After Effects. It saves me a ton of time. And then the final thing that I will cover is exporting. So I'll just delete our other two and then open this one back up. And obviously I want to re-show the background. Just make sure everything looks good here. Animate out, awesome. And then I'm just gonna go up to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. And the only real two things you need to worry about here is the output module and output 2, and that's gonna be our location. But the output module, all we have to do is hit the drop down and click high quality with alpha. And just for demonstration, if I click on that, that's going to be a ProRes 4444 RGB plus alpha. So that's going to give us that transparency layer that allows us to overlay that on top of the iMag, on top of any videos. You could drag that straight into After Effects again, and it'll be transparent. And then the output module, you can select wherever you want and just say use the comp name. So I'll just put this in that folder and hit render, and then you're done. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you, just seeing how I animate Photoshop files in After Effects. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more church video tips and tutorials every week.